This is the first PowerPoint presentation for Week 5 of World Geography, and it covers the Russian domain. Keeping in mind that Russia is a gigantic country with a diverse population and varied physical geography, the following 3 slides cover certain learning objectives in the textbook. Here are key concepts for this chapter, including taiga, czars, Slavic peoples, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, communism, glasnost, perestroika, and centralized economic planning. Here are the nations that comprise the Russian domain, all of them having once been part of the Soviet Union. They are Russia, Belarus, the Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia. When looking at the geographical territory of Russia, it is a vast west to east region of Eurasia. Indeed, the Eurasia is really one giant continent, and as one author has described Europe, it's really a peninsula of the greater Eurasian continent. Russia covers a significant portion of the Eurasian continent in the northern half. The other lecture this week will look at Central Asia, which really runs that east-west range below Russia to the south of Russia. From an historical perspective, I'd like to note that Belarus and Ukraine were the locations of some of the largest battles of World War II. The 10 largest battles of World War II were between the Germans and the Russians, and a number of those occurred in the region of Belarus and Ukraine. One of the interesting large animals that has nearly gone extinct in this great region, but is making a slight comeback and is certainly being protected, is the Vicent, which is the European version of the bison, probably closely related to the American bison or buffalo. Did you know that there was a bison in Europe? Here's the climate map for the Russian domain, and of course, it can get quite cold in the region. The Ural Mountains run north-south and are the boundary between Europe and Asia. They're in Russia, so they form the boundary between European Russia and Asian Russia, or otherwise known as Siberia, the great lengthy eastern portion of Russia. Running along the northern part of Siberia is the permafrost region, where the ground is often frozen, and running south of that, east-west, is the taiga, the coniferous forests of Russia. In the southwestern portion of Russia are the Caucasus Mountains between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and that nearly east-west running range of mountains separates Russia to the north from the Middle East to the south. As with other regions of the world, this region, the Russian domain, has its deep environmental problems. Of course, the most famous was 1986's Chernobyl incident. This map shows the obvious greater density of people toward the European and southern parts of Russia, whereas the great extent of Siberia is sparsely populated. As can be seen from this chart, Russia's population is less than half of the United States, even though it's a larger landmass. And the rate of natural increase is very low, even negative in a couple of nations. The book notes the various waves of migration that have occurred in Russia, such a vast country, wherein the movement is toward the east, where it is sparsely populated since the 1800s. And there are railroad systems that accommodate the movement of people across Russia, across Siberia. Right here on the slide, it notes Tsars with a T. That's a alternative spelling for CZAR, Tsar, which is a form of the word Caesar. And so is the German word Kaiser, both drawing inspiration from the Roman Empire. Now, in the east, or moving toward the east in Russia, was the Gulag Archipelago, a system of prisons. The most famous prisoner that we know of here in the West is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who is considered a hero of freedom. Now, as the book notes, there's Chinese immigration into Russia. This slide notes what was mentioned earlier, that the population of Russia is declining, and you can see that there's not a smooth pyramid with a wide base, which is indicative of population growth. Instead, it is fairly narrow at the base, especially once predicted in 2050. And up at the top of the left pyramid, you see the great reduction in males again. During World War II, the 9 or 10 greatest battles, that is the highest level of deaths, occurred in battles between Germany and Russia. The dominant form of Christianity found in the Russian domain is of the Orthodox variety, capital O. And thus, in theology and in worship, there are going to be similarities between the Russian Orthodox Church and, for instance, the Greek Orthodox Church. Often Christianity is divided into three
the distribution
great
of
branches: the Orthodox
ancient
churches,
and old
the
churches,
Catholic churches, and the Protestant
by
churches.
rite, R-I-T-E. It
You'll see on the
especially
next
notes
slide
churches
a chart from my
that
book
exist
that
and have
shows
existed for a long
how
time.
churches are in communion with
in
each other,
the
or
Near
more strongly
East.
in communion with each other.
Looking at this
along
one, we'll note the importance that Syria has
doctrinal
played
and
in the life of
liturgical
the Christian
lines.
church.
This is quite interesting.
Also to be noted
You'll
here
have
is the Assyrian
Eastern
Church of the East,
churches in the Roman
known
Catholic
usually
communion,
as the Nestorian
such as the Maronite
Church,
Church,
although scholars are getting
agree
away from using that term.
theologically.
The church prefers to be called the Assyrian Church of the East.
The
This
Eastern
is that
Maronite
church that
will
made its way
have
all the way to
liturgy more in
China
common with
fairly
the
early
Eastern
in
churches,
the history of the church.
usually identified as Orthodox.
There have been
So there's
disagreements
two ways of
among
comparing
these various churches,
the
although
Christian
there is a lot of work
churches
at reconciliation
by
going on, including
doctrine,
reconciliation with, which
where
you
they
see in
line
the
up
upper left,
closely,
RC, the
and
Roman
by
Catholic Church.
the way they worship, which
Notice
is
that
deeply
in
rooted in
communion
history as well.
with the Roman Catholic Church are churches such as the Maronite and the Syrian Catholic Church. Each of these by row in the chart are in union with each other. Thus, under Orthodox, I have the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox Church. And then, historically, there were those who disagreed with the decision of the Council of Ephesus, such as the Assyrian Church, and those that agreed with the Council of Chalcedon, such as the Coptic Church. But all of these affirm the earlier Nicene Creed.
The dominant language group of the Russian domain is the Slavic language group. And of course, it can be broken up into more particular languages. The Slavic language group is a part of the Indo-European family of languages. Other Indo-European language groups include the Celtic and Latin branches, the Germanic, of which English is a part, the Hittites, who are now gone, the Persians, Farsi, and even Sanskrit down in India. So it's a very large family of languages, Slavic being a major branch. This slide is important to us today because we can see here on the left side that you have a high percentage of Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine at the eastern extent of the Ukraine. And we're seeing along that border, the Russian-Ukraine border, of course, major problems, especially Russia's desire to take control of that region. And of course, there are lots of people in that region who want that. But of course, that imposes on the sovereignty of the Ukraine. The next slide brings up the era that I grew up in, and we were always so aware of in the United States, and that is the period of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was, at that time, a communist, socialist state, and just before it got better, the relations with the emergence of Mikhail Gorbachev's leadership. The bottom of the next slide shows what was going on in the early 80s. Very tense. But then Mikhail Gorbachev came along with his policy of glasnost, which is openness, and perestroika, which is restructuring. And it was a good thing. And the Cold War finally ended. This is an interesting slide. On the left, it shows Russian leader Vladimir Putin, and on the right, a venue from the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. Indeed, not long after the Olympics ended in Sochi, Vladimir Putin and Russia became involved in the Ukrainian crisis. Russia today is far different economically from the Russia I grew up studying when I was in high school and college. Back then, the communist Soviet Union was a centrally planned economy. Today, there's a lot of private business and commercialization.